Hello, I'm Shawn Brenneman, Agronomic Services Manager with Syngenta Canada, and I'm joined today here with Eric Richter, Agronomic Sales Rep with Syngenta. And we're going to talk a little bit today about some of the weed control options in soybeans and some of the latest research that we're seeing in weed control for specifically soybeans, right, Eric?
Right.
Well, welcome, Eric.
Thank you.
When we think about weed control, and we think about some of the science that surrounds the weed control, we know some basic things. We know that those weeds that come up with the crop early have the biggest impact. And we also know that the density and the species of those weeds also has a big impact on that crop, and specifically on the yield loss. What's some of the latest research that we've seen with weed science and specifically in soybeans?
Well, Shawn, Clarence Swanton has done some exciting work on weed management over the last number of years. And the original work, the initial work, talked about the critical weed-free period for soybeans being between the first and third trifoliate. And his newest work, like corn, also shows that for soybeans, that critical weed-free period starts at emergence.
Very early.
Very early. And you know, in terms of the weed competition, early emerged weeds in a soybean crop, growers can expect 15 to 40% yield reduction with weeds coming up during that critical weed-free period. So Shawn, controlling areas of your field with high density of weeds is really important to minimize yield loss. And it varies, of course, by species. For example, with annual grasses, 5 seeds or 5 plants per meter squared, you can have a reduction of 4 to 15% in yield. But compared to the broadleafs, i.e. lamb's quarter, pigweed, eastern black nightshade, as low as 1 plant per meter squared can have the same impact on yield, 4 to 15%. So you can see very few weeds and yet a significant impact on the bottom line.
And it's not only yield that those weeds impact, if I remember rightly. It's actually the physiology of the plant too that they can impact?
That's exactly right. So what happens when that soybean plant senses weeds in close proximity, it changes its growth pattern, and we actually see the plant producing more top growth and less root mass, and also less nodules. So we can have very low weed pressure, the plant modifies its growth, and we see reductions in root mass. And what's important there to realize is that then the plant is less able to handle other stressors like drought, disease, even nutrient uptake, and so on. So here we are with weed pressure, and making that plant, it compounds that effect, and the plant's just not able to handle those other stresses as well.
So very similar to how weeds impact corn, we're seeing similar results in soybeans and how they similarly impact that crop. Yeah. Interesting. Eric, you mentioned eastern black nightshade, and that's a weed that I work with a lot of customers who struggle with year in and year out. Can you elaborate a little bit on the impact that eastern black nightshade as a weed has on their soybean crop?
No, there's no doubt, Shawn, that eastern black nightshade is a major weed, particularly for those growers growing IP beans. It's highly competitive broadleaf, and as I mentioned earlier, 1 plant per meter squared will have a significant impact on yield, up to 14%. But it's just not the fact that the eastern black nightshade is a potential problem in the critical weed-free period, but it's just as important outside that period. If we have late emergers that manage to go to seed, produce the berry, and then in turn the growers harvesting that crop and those berries find their way into the bin and into the crop, potentially can stain those soybeans. So the grower will lose 2 ways. They will have that yield loss associated with those escapes, but also potentially losing their IP premium and a significant hit on the bottom line.
And one more aspect, I'm thinking about corn-soybean rotations and that previous crop to soybeans. Can you tell me a little bit about corn and the impact it has on the soybean crop that following year?
Shawn, in an IP system, volunteer corn potentially can have a big impact. Volunteer corn needs to be considered as a weed, and very low populations can have an impact on yield up to 10%. It's not just the yield loss, though. It's similar to the other story we told, where you could potentially have kernels of corn harvested with that IP crop, and then when the grower takes that crop to the elevator, they lose their premium. So again, a double whammy. They're losing on yield, and they're also potentially putting their premium at risk. Losing their premium is a high probability with volunteer corn.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you for the information. Shawn Brenneman signing off with Syngenta, and for more information, visit syngentafarm.ca.